welcome to Absolutely Fabulous. My name is Gillian Fennell, also known as Station Mum 101. I love everything about agriculture, especially the people and especially communicating about what makes Australian ag so special.
And I'm Katja Williams, a beef, cattle and cropping farmer from Dubbo, New South Wales. And I love all things ag, and I'm also known as the ultimate farm wife. Together, we are Absolutely Fabulous, and we are talking all things agriculture beyond the headlines.
And we can't wait to give our opinion to you, and we hope you enjoy it.
So let's get into today's episode. So we are going to start each episode with a little bit of chit chat about what's going on in both of our states and on our farms and stations. So, Gillian, what's happening with Station 101?
Oh, look, we got some cattle away last week, which was really good because it's starting to really dry off here. And interestingly enough, we're getting better prices in Queensland than we are in South Australia. So we trucked our cattle all the way to Roma. So that was, a bit of an undertaking. But yeah, now we're just back to general station maintenance. I'm due to be getting a new kitchen soon. For those who follow me online, they will know that for many years my kitchen cupboards have had no doors. So it's just that sort of like every time we're like, oh, we'll do the kitchen, but then it starts mustering. I'm like, oh, I'm not having no kitchen. Yeah. While we've got staff here, that's 100% not happening. And I'm not cooking outside when it's 40 degrees or minus 4 degrees. Like everything has to be just perfect. But, we're ramping up. We're finally bracing ourselves to rip the old kitchen out and put the new kitchen in.
That is very exciting. We must be on the same trucking schedule because we also trucked steers up to Queensland this year to sell them to one of our main feeder lots that we send cattle to. And then we are also have realised that, we have only 4 months maximum until baby number 4 joins us here on the farm. And so we've just started the hunt for a new family farm vehicle. So ticking all our boxes on how many seats it's got to have and what bull bar and side rails we'll need to have on it. And so that's all been going really well. And then the Ultimate Farm Wife has recorded over 60 interviews. So we're about to wrap up. Oh, what season are we on now? Season 6. So we'll soon be launching into season 7 in the springtime.
That's an incredible piece of work, honestly. Like, it's such an amazing resource. Like, because I'm a bit older than you, like just a fraction. If I'd had something similar when I'd first started out as the first, because my husband's the oldest, if I'd had something like that available to me when I first married into this very strong traditional generational farming family, it would have been so much easier. So I'm so pleased that you've doing that for us, doing that for the ladies and the men and the families, because we all need to learn and move along. Otherwise we'll keep repeating the mistakes of the past. So can't do that.
Absolutely. And I have just started the funding applications for my Farm Wives Conference, which I'm hoping to host in April in Dubbo as well. So that's been a very exciting task, trying to squeeze everything in.
Who's going to be doing the babysitting? Is Dad going to be hands-on?
It'll either be Dad or hopefully I can get a funded mother's room.
That would be awesome. So shout out to anyone who wants to fund that mother's room, Huggies, Johnson & Johnson. Support the rural women's industry.
Absolutely. And Gillian, we have 2 articles that we're going to be covering on today's podcast. Should we jump into those?
We should because everyone just loves to hear what we think, and everyone's so excited.
It's always nice.
And if they don't, I don't care. Yeah, of course. Opinions are worth what you pay for them, and luckily this is a free podcast, so.
Absolutely. So, Gillian, would you like to introduce our first article and start us off?
I would, if I'd organised myself to write it down, so maybe you should do that.
For those that have been following Gillian and I on social media, you would have seen this article linked on our socials, and we will also probably add it to the title for this episode. But we are covering an article which was released by the Journal of Rural Studies, The Dreaded Daughter-in-Law in Australia Farm Business Succession. And it was a study that has come out of the University of New England, which is based in Armidale.
And it is an amazing piece of work. And it's fascinating how a lot of people in our industry like, oh, we don't see gender. If you're the right person for the job, you'll do this and you'll do that. But unfortunately, society isn't structured that way. And so we still carry out these roles in these, things that have been predetermined for us. And the minute you step outside that predetermined role, it makes a lot of people really uncomfortable. And that's what a lot of these studies have uncovered. It's like, and, there are positive stories out there, and I love to hear them because it sort of gives everyone else a little bit of hope. But unfortunately, once we start looking at any sort of detail at these issues, it's generally pretty shit.
Yes. What I found most interesting, I usually flick to, what makes up the article and what makes up the research first, because I always like to know what's going on in the background of an article or some research before I read into it and get too bogged in with the details of the research. So what I thought was really fascinating about this one is that they interviewed 22 I can't say it.
We're so professional.
Words. 22 different organizations, and of that 22 participants, 17 were women and 5 were men, ranging in ages from 20 to 60s. And they were made up of different businesses, whether that was where farmers and farming families go for legal advice, rural financial counselling, industry associations, accountants, succession planners, and agribusiness consultants. So the first thing about this article is it is research based on professionals, not on farmers and farm wives themselves, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm wondering how many, farmers are actually and farms are represented by those 22 organisation participants.
You'd like to think it'd be quite a significant amount, because they chose the participants quite broadly. And like many of these studies, it's always hard to get people to participate in these sorts of things. It hats off to those people who did choose to be interviewed and to provide insight into what they are experiencing. And so, when you think, because some of these practitioners have been in business for 40 odd years. So the amount of families and individuals that they would have contributed to and helped through this process would be a fairly large number. So I think it's fairly safe to say it's a pretty good representative slice of what's actually happening in the industry, which doesn't exactly fill me with confidence when you look at the results and the findings.
Absolutely. The article actually states that the research team from UNE found that in Australian ag, the daughter-in-law is valued for her role in biological, social culture, and financials, as in off-farm income. But then on the other side of the ball, they are also seen as the biggest threat to family farming.
And it is fascinating because, and this is where those gender role things sort of come into it. It's like, okay, so her role is to breed, to carry on the next generation, because that's really important to a lot of people, and especially like when you're tied up in that piece of land that your family might have had for hundreds of years or whatever since they rolled off the boat. It's so there's that element, and it's like, oh well, she might be handy, she can cook for the shearers. We won't need to employ a shearer's cook, and she can get a job in town, so then we don't have to worry about paying the son a living wage because they can just live off her wage. But then when she's like, okay, well, obviously I'm valued for a certain thing, so let me do something else that I want to do and enjoy and be part of this business. It's like, no, that's not for you. These are your roles. Don't you dare step out of that box that we've built for you. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict and tension comes in. And that's what makes her dangerous, is that she's upsetting the status quo and challenging the existing norms that a lot of people don't want challenged because it's uncomfortable for them and will mean changes to their life.
Absolutely. And I think that's so funny that you bring that up and you mention that, because the article also goes into the ideal qualities of a daughter-in-law. And it actually states out, they need to be loyal, kind, practical, low maintenance, and uncomplicated. These are words they are actually using out of this research that was mentioned by farming families, particularly the patriarch or the head of the farming family, to describe their ideal daughter-in-law.
Yeah, it's like, don't give me drama and I'll give you a kitchen with doors. It's that, and you know, I feel really sorry actually for the older generation women, like, because they've married these men, you know, and they've had to tolerate this sort of mindset. And, you know, it must be so frustrating for them to then like see how society has changed. Because even since I first got married 20 odd years ago, society has changed massively. Like if my boy who's 18, if he decided to get married, I would cross my heart, hope to die, never treat my future daughter-in-laws the same way that I was expected to behave and act, because I know society has changed. And so expectations have changed, especially the younger generation's expectations of us, the older generation. And to be sort of trapped in that situation where you want to do better, but you can't, because the box that's been built around you is now built out of titanium. You can't change. That must be so frustrating. And I really have a lot of empathy for people who find themselves in that situation.
In my interviews on the Ultimate Farm Wife as well, I've sort of found either talking to farmers and farm wives either on the camera in our interviews or off the camera afterwards, there kind of seems to be two camps, isn't there? Like either the mother-in-law is really supportive, or like the in-laws are really supportive because they know how hard it's been for them, either adjusting as a family farming business or the relationships, or they fit into the camp of, well, I had to put up with it and I had to do it, so I don't know why you're whinging. And I had to do it by myself, so you're going to have to do it by yourself. Like, there seems to be complete polar opposites still within the community.
And you'll find some people who had like the most terrible situations themselves with their in-laws, and then they will then like perpetuate that with the next generation when they have the opportunity to change. And then you have some people who had like a really great experience, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, let's pass that great experience down. And then you've got the opposite. And it's like, you know, humans are fascinating creatures that they can't, you know, like they don't follow a plan. Like, because you'd think, oh, well, you know, logic says that if they got a bad time of it, they'll want to make it better. But often it's not the case. And yeah. And so I wonder, like, how does the external forces like commodity prices and land prices and, you know, different threats of profitability and sustainability, how does that all play into people's attitudes? Like, oh, well, you know, we will treat into ourselves and make life a lot harder than it has to be for everyone because everything outside is hard. And it's just, yeah, very interesting.
At a point on that.
When you talk to all these people, Katya, like, because you've done 60 odd interviews and I was one of them, thank you very much. Is it pretty common? So how, like the ladies that you speak to who have married a farmer and have gone like, I never expected it to be like this and he probably should have prepared me better. Do you hear that quite a bit?
I probably hear that in at least 90% of interviews. And I think the main problem or the main theme that underlines that is you've got TV dramas like McLeod's Daughters and Farmer Wants a Wife, and they only show sort of the more positive, romantic side of it, and they're producing silver linings on every episode that don't really deep dive into the toughness of a lot of farming situations, both in their relationships, the day-to-day jobs and tasks. Like a lot of them, I mean, I've been on farm over 10 years now, and I would say, you know, the jobs that I do are not hard, but I need to still learn how to do them. Like I still needed to learn from a starting point. For me, I mean, I came from a small sheep farming property into mixed farming, both with stud cattle and cropping. So there's still a lot to learn going from farm to farm. And if you're coming from a background where you don't have that, and you're coming from city or a town, and then you've got to learn, like you're jumping in the deep end and you go in with all these, you know, romantic fantasies, particularly now with the next generation coming through with Instagram and YouTube, and they're showing just the romance of it, and rather than the deep diving, let's deep dive into what it is, skills we actually need. What are we going to do? And particularly farm wives, because that's where, my specialty sits. What conversations are we having with our farmer before we move to the farm? Sometimes we're not having, those deep dive conversations about what my role is and what I look like on the farm or in the family farming business until you're already there. And a lot of us have moved hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers away from family, friends, and our network to be there. So I really think that is like the crux of it as well.
That's a good thing. I think we need, well, you could probably do this because you're far more organised than I am. We need a checklist. So if you're dating a farmer, you need a checklist of questions that you need to ask him. And number 1, will my kitchen cupboards have doors? Number 2, will I be expected to light a fire so I can have hot water? Where is the toilet located? We need to really get down into the details of will I be expected to cook for 20 people at a moment's notice? Where's our food going to come from? Because you're right, we do see on Instagram and the rise of the trad wife and all this sort of thing, like people baking bread from scratch. I know that was a really cool thing to do 30 odd years ago, but I've got shit to do. I can't be baking bread from scratch. What even is this life? Yeah, especially if you live remote like me and you have to teach your kids because we can't afford a governess, and then you still got to cook for the men, and you still got I have interest in business of my own, and we've got our own business and we've got the farm business. How's it all going to work? Because I don't think we do ask that, because we do get caught up in the romance. And I think a part of us is afraid that if we start asking the hard questions, that we might hear answers that we don't want to hear. And then then what do we do? Probably better to be forewarned and forearmed rather than turn up into a situation thousands of kilometres away from your support network and be like, uh-oh. And that's why I think the older generation sort of perceives the new daughter-in-law as a bit of a threat, because in the old days you were stuck there, and you just had to make it work. This day and age, you pick up the phone, you're like, I'm out, get back in your car, drive back to the city, go back to your own job that you had. Yeah. Nowadays it's she's a lot more mobile and can really disrupt things. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of them oh, well, she's spoiled and, she expects too much. When, some people do. I'm pretty sure some people would expect a lot, especially when they don't understand the cash flow situation of what a lot of farming is. It's no, sorry, we can't pay for anything for 12 months because we haven't got the crop off and we owe millions at the bank. No holiday for us this year. The dam's dry. You can't, we're not going to town. No parties for us. And that's challenging and that's hard, because when times are good, yeah, sure, let's go on a cruise and let's buy a new car and that sort of stuff. So a lot of people don't understand that boom and bust sort of aspect of it. What the good stuff is, and makes the hard times really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that links back in with what the research was saying as well, where they were 16 out of the 22 organisations reported that the older generation were basically holding the younger generation to ransom. That's the financial situation on farm. How many of us talk about that, in the lead up? Are you going to get a wage? Are you going to get paid for your contribution? Or are you going to do 10 plus years of unpaid work? And then, how are you going to buy those luxury items like your dishwasher and your washing machine and whatever else it is to be able to make your life a bit easier, especially if you're even if you just, no, sorry, let me say that again. Even if you're mum and you're staying, in the house and you're doing the cooking and you're doing the cleaning and you're looking after the kids, that's hard enough as it is. But as you and I both know as well from our farming operations, we've also got to be out in the paddock. We've also got to be doing the job. So we leave the house at the same time and, we come back at the same time and we've still got to do our domestics. So let's try to have those conversations a little bit earlier, because, the average age, as we know, but also that's outlined in the article, is that it's 58. The average farming age is 58 for that main head of the family. So you're not actually getting a lot of succession, if succession happens, until they're around their 60s. And that would put most kids in their 40s before it's even happening. And that's hard for a lot of farmers and farm wives as well. Not only, the son, but the daughter-in-law, because you're still trying to fight that dynamic of we're not kids.
Yeah, we're adults and we work here as adults, and we have wants and needs and goals and objectives. And then, then the older generation wants to cry when the middle generation's kids look at what's happening and go, you know what, I'm out. I'm going to uni. I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to, go and work in town. I'm going to be a hairdresser. I'm going to do whatever. I'm not interested in life on the farm, because I can see what's going to happen. Like, they think, well, no woman in their right mind is going to want to marry me and come and live here. And so then the very thing that they're trying to protect has fallen apart for a lack of planning and talking, and I guess a lack of vision, because they can't, fear holds you back in a little box. So to be able to look and see, is there a better way to achieve what I want, and knowing what you want in the first place, that's a big thing. I think a lot of older farmers, because, agriculture, there's probably a lot of professions, but agriculture especially, we're very passionate. And like, it is a job, and yes, we get paid to do it, and we should be paid to do it. But we put up with a lot for no money, because we love it, and we love doing what we do, and we love our lifestyle. And so they get caught up in that, and it forms part of their identity. And so they can't envision themselves not being a farmer, which makes succession planning a little bit harder, because in their mind it means giving up and moving away and sitting in a unit in the old people's home and doing nothing all day, because they can't perceive a life where they're not a farmer. And I think that's a big thing that holds it back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you see like that generational flow on of, well, I didn't get the farm until I was in my 40s or 50s. And then, realistically, you're only giving it a good crack for a couple of years before the next generation is expecting it to be handed down, or at least for them to step up into, management or partnership roles. And you kind of see how that effect pushes out with each generation if it's not addressed early.
Yeah. It lack of planning, and it's frustrating, because a lot of us in our jobs, we're really good at planning. We're good at planning 5-10 years ahead about what we're going to do with this paddock and that paddock, and expand, contract, whatever. But we can't seem to plan our own sort of life. And you're just sort of like, oh, I'll just farm till I drop dead. Don't worry about anybody else. Yeah, challenging for the people who have to come behind.
Yeah. And while we're talking about that succession side, one of the statistics which I saw in the research that I thought we need to come back and address in a future episode already, so, we're planning out future episodes of this podcast as well, is that only 10% of daughters are even involved in the succession planning of a farm. So, what's the other 90% doing if they're not even being spoken or considered into what's going to happen with the generation of the farm? And
that's, it's very frustrating. And it must be even more frustrating for those of the next generation after me. Because I was born into my gender roles sort of things. So I've only really started to challenge what I can and can't do, just recently, to everyone's sort of dismay. Because I don't want to be wife and mum exclusively anymore in the roles that I've been born into. And it took me a long time to sort of acknowledge that, I don't have to be that thing that I was born into. And but that's whatever. But for the young people who've come after me, and they were told by my generation, oh, you can do anything you want, do whatever, be a bricklayer, it's all cool. But we didn't give the rest of society the tools to help women do those things. And that's why it's still very challenging from them. We've told them, oh, you can do whatever you want, but we haven't given them childcare or, tools that are easier to use. For example, a pair of pliers. I can't use a pair of pliers properly because they're too big for my hands. I can't trim the horse's feet properly because, the horse trimmers just don't work properly. So we want women to do this job, but only if they fit into a man's mold, which is a bit, tractor seats, everything. Everything's designed around a man's body, a man's strength, a man's arm span, everything like that, when it doesn't have to be that way. And that's a very frustrating thing.
Yeah.
But to be completely excluded from where you've grown up, your life, to not even have your question asked, come on, that's a bit rude.
Yeah.
Realistically, come on, parents, what are you playing at?
I guess my closing statements, on this article is really down to one sentence, which I laughed at because I found it so preposterous, but also because I've heard people say this. And so this, like, the sentence was a direct quote. So one of the participants in the study actually quoted this. They said, like, they were talking to some farmers, and the farmer was saying, I don't want some floozy coming along and taking half the farm. Now, like, if that's the starting point for these daughter-in-laws to be moving onto the farm, where do we really expect them to be able to take off? Like, how are we expecting them to thrive within this environment? Because, like, now, you know, all you've done is stepped on the farm, and all you have to do is prove yourself and push yourself, and you're still trying to work out who you are and where you fit in this family. And you've now, you know, according to the, you know, this line of thought, you've now got to prove who you are, where you've come from, and your benefit of being on the farm. You shouldn't have to start from that starting block, because so many people that I talk to and so many farm wives that I know, they are so intelligent. They have a huge range of skills that can actually benefit the farm going forward from the get-go. Yes, they've got to learn the actual work side and the family farming business side of it, but what they have is so essential. So I just wanted to end on that, because that's an incredibly hard starting block to start on.
And it's one you can never get over, I don't think, because the moment you have to always be perfect. If that's the attitude so any sort of disagreement, any sort of disillusionment you might have, any sign that you're actually a human person with human emotions who, you know, doesn't fit into that, like, it's like, well, I told you she'd be trouble. I told you she'd do this. I told you she'd be that. And I think that's what sets a lot of families and relationships up to fail. And that's pretty sad, to be honest.
Yeah. So, guys, we are wanting to build a big community around this podcast and the articles that we share. So join us on our social medias. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn. We'll be on Twitter as well. So join the conversation. What did you think of this research? Or if you haven't seen it and this conversation has sparked, we'll link it in, you know, in the show notes. Have a look. Let us know what you think. See where your thoughts and opinions lie on it.
You don't have to agree with us. Like, you're allowed to disagree. I wouldn't recommend it, but, you know, you are allowed to.
And with that, we will move into our second topic for discussion today, which is the live sheep export ban. Gillian, would you like to take the lead on this one today?
Yeah, so this has been an ongoing policy position of the Labor Party, and a lot of people have said that it was to secure Greens and Animal Justice Party preferences to keep them in power. And frustratingly, despite a lot of people in the industry claiming it would never happen, it's now happened and it's been legislated. And now the Western Australian sheep producers, and to a lesser extent the rest of the sheep producers of Australia, are now suffering the consequences of this ban and the announcement. It's a pretty frightening thing, to be completely honest, to ban an industry that, yes, we can't shy away from the fact that it has had massive dramas, but the amount of improvement that it has demonstrated, and the amount of regulation and the amount of good that it does for not only the Australian agricultural industry, but for food security worldwide, especially in the Middle East, to ban an industry like that over people's feelings is a pretty, it should make a lot of people very anxious about what will be the next thing banned, because it hurts someone's feelings or they don't agree with it. If something is not doing harm but is doing good, if something is helping people, but some people don't like it, then that sort of opens the door to anything. We're not relying on science, data, and fact. We're relying on opinions and feelings, and that's a really dangerous place to make policy from.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly as I haven't found an industry body in agriculture who is for this. So anyone who's actually in the agricultural space, like whether they're cattle, sheep, piggeries, they are all against this policy. So what is the Labor Party doing?
The Labor Party is, well, you know, they will say they are mandated to do it because they took it to 2 elections and then they eventually got elected on preferences. So they'll say, oh, we're just doing the will of the Australian people. The research done by LiveCorp, which is the RDC, so for those who don't follow industries, the Research and Development Corporation for the live export industry, they do public sentiment research periodically. The majority of Australians don't even know or understand what live export is, let alone support or don't support it. And that's, you could probably say that's a failure of Australian agriculture in communicating that aspect of our industry to our voters, because it makes it so easy then for voters to be captured by activists and those sorts of people who are like, oh, look at this terrible photo that was taken 20 years ago. Must stop these greedy, terrible farmers who abuse people and animals at every step, and they're just evil, evil creatures, which I've got all the screenshots that prove that people are actually saying that sort of trash. So, yeah, I don't think that they fully comprehended the impact it would have on the rest of agriculture, and also the sudden nature of it. So there's been a report done by Episode 3, Independent Agricultural Consulting and Analytics firm, that said and this is a big thing because they themselves don't support the ban, they said if the ban is going to happen, phase out gradually over 10 years, that will give the entire industry and the network of different intersecting agricultural commodities time to adjust. And Murray Watt at the time said he hadn't even read that report and just went, nah, fuck this shit, let's ban it. That was the shocking sudden nature of it, I think, is what's thrown a lot of people into disarray.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't understand about agriculture is how interconnected everything is. So it's not just sheep, it's wool, because the main export creatures were merino, wethers and ewes that were not cutting good wool anymore. So they're still having purpose at the end of their life. So people are going to go, oh, well, merinos are extra hard because I've got to shear them. If I can't make that bit of money out of them at the end, I won't run them anymore. So it's got a flow-on effect. It's also got a flow-on effect to the eastern states because that's where a lot of the stud ewes and rams come from to feed into Western Australia. And if there's no other outlet in Western Australia because there's very limited abattoir capacity, people just go, oh, I'll just put wheels underneath them and send them east. South Australian sheep prices just collapsed. We've got people here, we've got no feed because it's dry, it's winter time, we've got no grass, they've got no good prices. So, it's just no one thought about the consequences of their action, which is probably the most frustrating thing because policymakers and government were told in exquisite detail what would happen and what needed to be done to soften the blow, and they just went, nah, fuck those guys, just ban it, which is so frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think it's also very frustrating when they want to talk about the impact of the market. When the Labor government was actually being interviewed on this, they were saying things like, well, the market has been decreasing over the last few years anyway. It's in decline. But when you still look at the numbers, it's still a really strong export. And, well, why wouldn't it be in decline when they've brought it to 2 elections and they're talking about that when, that impacts confidence as well? Because as we said previously, in our other article, we're planning, at a minimum on farm, we are planning 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in advance. So if they're talking about these policies and they've brought it in, of course it's going to impact and unsecure the market. Plus, on top of that, for the last few years, you've got the climate control and impact on the industry. You've got heightened costs due to inflation and what that means per kilo cost ratios. And then, this is still an industry which used to be wildly promoted across Australia as, Australia was built on the sheep's back, and that was its biggest industries in the 40s, 50s and 60s. So, and it's still it hasn't really reduced from there.
It hasn't. And one of the most frustrating things is that they say, oh, it's an industry in decline. Technically, if you look at a graph, yes, but that's without considering that Saudi Arabia, who wouldn't take, because we only send to countries that have FCAS, right? Which is our standards. for receiving and handling and transporting the livestock. So if a country doesn't agree to have FCAS, then we go, okay, well, you can't have our product, and that's too bad, so sad for you. Because came in after the Indonesian live cattle ban. It's like, okay, obviously the people at the other end need a bit of support to make sure that these sort of things don't happen. So we developed FCAS and said, all right, if you want our livestock, then you have to adhere to this. Saudi Arabia said that threatened their sovereignty because they didn't want to take up another country's rules and regulations. So they said, we won't buy your sheep. Okay, they buy like millions of sheep per year. I can't remember the exact number. They've recently just signed up to FCAS and want to buy our sheep. There's no limit to the amount of sheep that they could take every single live export sheep that Australia produces and still have capacity to take more. Now we can't send it to them. And so that's a massive impact on the trade relationship there, because they said, okay, finally we'll agree to your standards, and we said, okay, sure, we'll send you some sheep. And then our government said, no, you can't have sheep anymore. Tough biscuits for you. And if I was Saudi Arabia, I'd be a bit annoyed about that, because I'd be like, I've gone to all this trouble, I've agreed to your rules, and now what? You're not going to send sheep anymore? Like, how dare you? And I think that a lot of these sorts of things, and when you get involved in some of these discussions online with activist type people, they're really quite racist, because it's like they don't want brown people to have our animals, which is an interesting sort of it always comes back to, well, if we don't send them overseas and the prices will be cheaper here, okay, that's not how the markets work. And it's like, oh, well, they're just heathens, and they call them all sorts of names, and, disgusting religious practices. It's like, and this is the disconnect that we have, because 10 or so years ago, even nowadays, a lot of times, if you're slaughtering a sheep on the paddock, you just get home, you just slit its throat, because that's how you killed a sheep. Like, and we have that connection because we're still doing it, but because they don't see that element of it, because sort of the urban areas have lost that connection to the rural areas. They don't understand that just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean it's cruel. And I think that's what we've lost.
Yeah. I think we've even lost that connection within rural communities, because, I mean, I told you this funny story earlier, and I think I'd like to share it here now, is in, the previous article, the actual name of it, I was actually going to get, the dreaded daughter-in-law. No, what was I going to get? I was going to get the most dangerous animal on farm put on my shirt for today's episode. And one of the printing companies, I won't name who it is, in Dubbo, which is a rural city which is based and grown on agricultural businesses and communities, rang me up and was having a right go at me and saying the most dangerous animal on the farm is the farmer, because they kill everything. How dare they do their own home kills on property and kill all their livestock and ship them off? Why can't they buy it at the supermarket like everyone else?
It's interesting. It is. And a lot of this is agriculture's problem and fault, right? Because we don't think, we as the collective, as their representative bodies, as, levy payers, whatever you want to describe us as, we don't think that talking to customers and consumers is important, because we think we know how important we are. We know how essential agriculture is. So we just believe that we're the experts. If we say we need this, then everyone will just go, okay, because they want that food at the supermarket. We aren't talking to the people who are actually voting and buying our stuff. And that's dangerous, because the people who are talking to them are activists, environmental non-government organisations who are, say that we're doing all these terrible things, and we're not. Because you go to any of these people's pages, any of them, and the very first thing on their page is donate now. And they are making millions of dollars, and we cannot fight that, because we, as a collective, again, think, well, I pay my levy, what's going on? But our RDCs, our research and development corporations, can't do advocacy. So if we want advocacy done, which is talking to our consumers and talking to voters about what's important to have cheap food on the supermarket shelves, what we need, that's advocacy. We need to pay for it. Our levies won't cover that, but we won't, because we don't see it's important. We think, oh, well, then, and we do it ourselves. We call them inner city, latte sippers and those. How many of us have a coffee machine at home now? Like, guys, stop alienating the very people who can help you. This is driving me crazy.
I think that's a key point that you've said, and I think you need to drive that home again.
Oh, it's like,
stop alienating them. We need them to help us.
And at the end of the day, we can't expect people to vote against their own self-interest because everyone is struggling, right? People can't afford to buy a house. People have no access to healthcare. It doesn't matter where you live, whether you live in a city or whether you live in the bush. There's no hospitals, there's no nurses, there's no doctors. So if someone comes along and they promise you cheaper housing and better healthcare and better education, but we're going to ban a rural industry, people go, you know what, I do like sheep, but I have to look after me. And that's the sort of attitude that we have to acknowledge first, because we are so good at poor farmer me, drought, high interest prices, low commodity prices, high inputs. Oh, no one knows how hard it is. And then we drive a brand new motor vehicle and, all that sort of stuff, which we know why we do it and we know why we have to do those things. But it's really, if you can't afford, when you're working 3 jobs and can still barely make rent, you're not going to go, those farmers are doing it tough.
Mm.
You're going to be like, fuck those guys. They look at their brand new car. And so we got to understand the lives that we're selling to and communicate with them and understand them. And then they can understand us. Someone has to extend the olive branch first. And people are too busy trying to live and make a living. We are blessed that a lot of us at some certain times of the year do have spare time and energy to put into this sort of stuff. So it's got to be us because it's most important to us. So we have to do it first. But someone has to pay for it. Because you and I both do a lot of heavy lifting on social media, and you through your podcast about promoting agriculture and, talking it up as a good place and space to be. No one pays us for this shit. Yet everyone's benefiting from our profile and from our talking about ag openly and trying to connect with the urban audience. So if we want to do that on a bigger scale, if we want to really make inroads into the urban population and get our issues across, we're going to have to pay. So, hands in pockets, people. Chop, chop.
Absolutely. And, that's not meaning, vast dollars. That could just be volunteer time. That could just be reaching out,
It could just be like trying to listen to people and just say in a nice conversational tone, like, okay, but to do my job, I need X, Y, and Z, instead of calling them names. Sometimes name calling is warranted, though, because people come looking for a fight. That there's no need to just be aggressive to everyone.
Yeah, I would agree on that too. We've covered 2 very hot topics at the moment, which is not only covered by the media, but also being spoken about in rural communities. And as we said earlier, when we were recording this podcast, we want to build this community. We want to hear from you. So jump on our socials, whichever platform is your absolute favourite. Let us know what you want to do about these topics. We'll probably throw a couple of tiles up so that we can break it down. Have you say, guys, jump on. What are you,
we are more than willing to hear your opinions.
We're not only wanting to hear the negatives, but also if you've got some ideas around what's the possible solution or, small steps that we could be taking as an industry, add them down as well, because, food for thought. You never know where it can lead.
What's something that's going really well that you see that industry has done or that individuals are doing that you think's making a massive difference? And we'll talk about that as well. We don't just want to bag out everyone, although everyone does love to hear that, but we also want to elevate and highlight the good work that people are doing. And we're really interested in connecting to our urban audiences. So, if you've got friends in urban areas, share this with them, because that's how we're going to get there. With conversation, it's talking. That's how we're going to get there. Communication is key.
Yeah, absolutely. If there is anything that we've mentioned in today's podcast episode, it will be linked below, including all our social channels and where you can find this episode. So thanks, guys, for listening. See you in the next one.
Bye.